Chapter 10 of Ozoplaning with the Wizard of Oz. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Pseudonymous Nerd. Chapter 10 The Wizard in Stratovania. It was, indeed, in the Ozpril, just as the soldier with the green whiskers had said. Even at a distance, Delia could spell out the name on the gleaming body, and as the silvery plane came swooping toward them, she could not repress a shout of joy. Too exhausted by the tearful ordeal that she had just been going through, to run and meet the ship, she jerked off her scarf and waved it wildly over her head. About 10 feet from the crystal boulder on which she had been sitting, the Ozpril came to a gentle and perfect landing. Scarcely had the whir and the sputter of its engine died away before the door of the cabin burst open, and down climbed the little Wizard of Oz, followed by Dorothy and the Scarecrow. The Cowardly Lion, last of all, had difficulty fitting his paws on the rungs, and after a trembling descent, rolled over on his back, his 4 feet straight up into the air. This trip had not agreed with the Cowardly Lion at all. Weak and dizzy, he made no attempt to rise. "Here you are at last!" cried the Wizard happily, rushing over to Delia and seizing both of her hands. "So this is where you've been? I must say, it's a nice place. It's fine. Why, it's beautiful, beautiful." Swinging around so he could look in all directions, the Wizard positively glowed with interest and enthusiasm. "What's so beautiful about it?" growled the lion without turning over. "Is there any grass? Are there any trees? Is there anything to eat?" Dorothy, on the point of embracing Delia, gave a little scream, for the tell-all-escope, which she had picked up just before leaving the plane, was making terse announcements. At this point it happened to be pointed at Delia. Clearing its throat, it remarked in a superior way, "You are now looking at Miss Delia Jam, formerly of Oz, at present the new Starina of Strat, by edict of Stratovius VII. Miss Delia the Jam, Starina of Stratovania, period. Stop, drop, or point elsewhere." "Why, Delia!" gasped Dorothy, letting the telescope fall with a crash. "Are you really? Oh my! I don't suppose you'll ever want to return to Oz now. Why, you must be having a wonderful time." "Huh!" sniffed Delia with a slightly wan smile. "If being pinched, chased, and nearly blown to atoms is having a wonderful time, then I guess I've been having it all right." "Tell me," requested the Scarecrow, who had been walking in a slow circle around Delia, "does one prostrate oneself before Starina, or does one merely kiss her hand?" "Neither," laughed Delia. Jumping up, she gave the Scarecrow such a hug that he was out of shape for hours. "But quick, let's all hop into the Ozpril and fly away before something terrible happens." "Fly away?" cried the Wizard, shoving back his high hat. "But my dear, we've only just come. I've been flying all night and need a little rest and refreshment before we start off again. Besides, I would like to see more about this interesting airland and its people to add to data on my strata." "That's what Nick thought," observed Delia, putting both hands on her hips. "And look what happened to him." "What did happen to him?" demanded the Wizard, realizing for the first time that Nick was not among the present. "You tell him," sighed Delia to the soldier. Sinking back on the boulder, she held her aching head in both hands. All eyes turned towards the soldier with the green whiskers, who opened and closed his mouth several times without saying a word. The Wizard, now thoroughly alarmed, began shaking him on one side and the Scarecrow on the other, until finally Van took a tremendous swallow and gave him the whole story. When the narrator reached the part where Strut had ordered Nick and him blown away, the Scarecrow hurried over to the balloon bush and began picking the almost ripe balloons as fast as his clumsy cotton fingers would permit. Not even had he about 20 did he ever pause. So light and flimsy was the straw man that the bunch of balloons on their long stems kept him jerking into the air. After each jerk, he would give a little grunt of satisfaction. "These are to keep me aloft in case of accidents," he explained hastily to Dorothy, who was looking at him intently. "But what about us?" asked the little girl, looking anxiously towards the Canopy City, which at present seemed absolutely deserted. "You mean to say that this wretched Strut, after naming Jellia Starina, forced Nick to fly him to Oz?" exclaimed the Wizard, grasping Banto in battles by both hands and gazing into his face. "Not only that," Banto told him hoarsely, "but he's taken his blowmen and 1,000 fighting men to conquer the country. He needs to bring back Ozma's crown, scepter, jewels, and all the treasures in our castles," finished the soldier dolefully. "Oh, can't we do something, Wizard?" cried Jellia determinedly. "I simply won't be a Starina. I won't. "Just the same, you make a very pretty one," murmured the Scarecrow, patting the little Oz maid consolingly on her shoulder. "But of course, we can't allow this bow-landing airlander to take over Oz." "If Nick had not taken possession of Stratovania for Ozma, he'd never have thought of it," groaned Jellia. Rising stiffly, she picked up the kit bag from Crystal Rock beside her. "Ah, so you still have my magic kitty." In spite of his anxiety, the Wizard smiled. "Indeed I have," said Jellia firmly. "It saved us from being blown away. I used some of your cheer gas, Wiz, but I didn't have time to try out any of the other magic. Here, you'd better take it now, and let's be starting. No telling when Kababy and those 3 blowmen will be coming back." "Forward march! Forward march!" Vanto in Battles started off all by himself for the Ozpril. "Hurry, hurry!" he called over his shoulder. "If those people return, they'll surely make trouble," yelled the soldier, his voice growing more emphatic. "Well, it's certainly a mix-up," said Dorothy, moving closer to the Wizard. "What do these people look like, Jellia? I'd really enjoy seeing a few." "They look like nothing you ever have imagined," Jellia told her with a slight shudder. "Goochers! Here comes some now. Oh, it's those blowmen and all the others. Look, Wizard, could we reach Ozpril before they reach us?" "Let's not try," decided the Wizard as the blowmen broke into a run. "Even if we made the plane, they might blow us to bits before I could get her to start. Let's stay here and reason with them until I find something in this bag to help us." "Oh, woe is we! Oh, woe is we!" gulped the Scarecrow, taking little runs and leaps into the air, hopeful that his balloons would lift him out of the danger zone as the threatening company grew near. The Queen was marching grimly ahead of her subjects. In some way, decided Jellia, she had discovered that Strut had not been in the little silver plane. As the Wizard opened his little kit bag, the little Oz maid rushed over to the Cowardly Lion. Get up, directed Jellia, giving him a desperate prod in the toe. "Get up, we need your growl, and listen," she begged, as the big beast rolled over and blinked sleepily at the approaching airlanders. "Do everything I tell you, or we are lost! Lost!" Dorothy concluded that Jellia had been quite right about the inhabitants of Stratovania. They were certainly like no one she had ever seen, and she could not help admiring the bold way in which Jellia came and stepped out to meet her dangerous adversary. "What are you doing here?" demanded Jellia, folding up her arms and tilting up her chin. "Did I not order you to leave us strictly alone? Blowman, take this baby woman away." "Kabebe's our queen," muttered one of the blowmen, scowling at Delia. "At least," he corrected, glancing at his comrades, "she is our queen until Strut returns." "What makes you think that Strut has not returned?" questioned Delia grandly. "Do you not recognize your master?" With a regal wave, Delia pointed to the Cowardly Lion. "Do you not that this is Strut changed to the great beast by the Ozma of Oz? But he is as powerful and as able as ever to rule this kingdom. Strut!" Imperiously, Delia appealed to the Cowardly Lion. "Am I the Starina of Stratovania?" The poor lion was startled at Delia's question as the Stratovanians. From sheer shock, he rose on his hind legs and gave a perfectly awful roar. Roar! Which was perhaps as convincing an answer as he could have given. "There, you see?" Delia shrugged her shoulders as Queen Kabebe and the blowmen turned as white as ghosts and began to move away. "It does sound like the master," stuttered the blowman as the Cowardly Lion followed up his roar with a reverberating growl. Grrr! "And what are your Majesty's wishes?" inquired Delia, inclining her head graciously towards the trembling lion. "Take that woman away, and have our supper prepared and served at once in the royal pavilion," directed the lion in his most commanding roar. End of chapter 10.
Chapter 11 of Ozoplaning with The Wizard of Oz. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ed Damerow. Ozoplaning with The Wizard of Oz by Ruth Plumly Thompson. Chapter 11. King, King Double King. The effect of the Cowardly Lion's speech was astonishing indeed. The Stratovanians behind the Queen turned and ran for their lives. They started backing away so fast they fell up at every step, so that their progress was curious enough to watch. There were few animals on the aerosphere, and certainly none that talked. Thoroughly convinced that the Cowardly Lion was Strut, and Strut was the lion, his terrified subjects fled in all directions. "Phew!" exclaimed the wizard, snatching out his green handkerchief and mopping his moist forehead. "That was quick thinking, my dear. Good acting, too," he puffed, leaning down to give the lion an approving pat. "Oh, wasn't he wonderful?" Delia hugged the lion so energetically he fairly gasped for breath. "Not so hard for me to play king," he wheezed when he managed to escape from Delia's embrace. "After all, I am king of the forest." "Well, however that may be, Delia is certainly Starina of the Strat," declared the Scarecrow. "I'm beginning to think Strut was right in choosing her. You've been wasting your talents in Oz, my dear, and you surely have earned a crown today." "But I don't want a crown," asserted Delia with spirit. Nevertheless, she was quite pleased at such high praise. "Now look, since the Cowardly Lion ordered supper in the royal pavilion, perhaps we'd better go. It will be as good a place as any to rest while we plan our next move." "Hi there, is everything all right?" Want to Win Battles, who had hidden himself behind a crystal rock at the Blowman's approach, now peered out nervously. "For the present," called the wizard, waving his kerchief. "For the present. Come along, soldier, we're going to have supper in the royal pavilion." "Not I," said the soldier, falling in step with the Scarecrow. "Count me out of that." "I'm sure I'll not be able to eat a bite," sighed Dorothy, picking up the tell-all-escope. "How can you even think of supper with those awful airmen flying to the Emerald City? Oh, why don't we go after them now?" "Because I do not believe Nick will take them to the Emerald City," said Delia, straightening her crown. "He'll lose them somehow, and then come back here for Wani and me." My own deduction exactly, agreed the wizard, walking briskly along beside Delia. But wherever Nick is, we'll find him, same as we have found you. How did you find us? Asked Delia, stopping short and staring up into the wizard's face. I've been wondering about that. Well, you see, explained the little magician impressively, on the Ozpril there is a magnetic compass that shows the exact course taken by the Oztober, provided both planes are in flight. By following the compass, I followed your exact route. The delay in our arrival was caused by the difference in speed. Why, then you saw the very same things we did, cried Delia, nodding distantly to several airlanders who were bowing to the ground as the little procession passed. The very same, said the wizard. Then, as a little afterthought, by the way, what did you see? Oh, nothing much but clouds, fog, an ice cloud, and some flying animals with spikes, Delia told him briefly, as she started up the long steps to the royal pavilion. The same with us, said the wizard, taking out a little book and squinting hastily at the precisely written entries. Clouds, fogs, spiked monsters. Ah! He closed the book with a little exclamation of admiration. So this is the seat of government. I must say I prefer a castle, observed the Scarecrow, jumping up the steps 3 at a time. Still, all these columns are very pretty indeed. Is my throne comfortable? Inquired the Cowardly Lion with a lordly sniff. That's right, giggled Delia. You will have to sit on the throne. That is, if Wani doesn't mind. The little maid turned mischievously to the soldier with green whiskers. After all, you are a kind of king, too. Not on your life, declared Wantowin violently. I wouldn't trade one button on my uniform for all the jewels in Strut's crown, nor one blade of Ozgrass for all the rocks in Stratovania. Bravo, bravo, applauded the Scarecrow. Having tied his balloons to one of the pillars, he was bouncing up and down on a blue air cushion. Try one, he invited, shoving a couple toward the wizard. Instead of one, the wizard put 3 of the air cushions together and stretched out at full length. You can't imagine how tired a fellow grows after 16 hours of flying, he murmured drowsily. I hope you girls will excuse me if I take a little nap. I wouldn't mind a nap myself, yawned Dorothy. Though she had dozed part of the night before, she felt extremely sleepy. Without much urging from Delia, she curled up on a couch at the back of the pavilion and was asleep almost before her head touched the pillows. Best thing in the world for them, grinned the Scarecrow, as Delia looked rather nervously from one sleeper to the other. We'll probably have to fly all night, if we get away from here at all. The Wiz needs a good rest before he does any more piloting. Yes, agreed Delia with a sigh. I suppose he does. But I hope the lion's not going to sleep too. Climbing to her throne, Delia gave him a good poke in the ribs. The lion, who was leaning back against the cushions with both eyes closed, shook his head. I never sleep on an empty stomach, he declared firmly. Besides, a lion can go for days, if necessary, without rest or refreshment. Didn't you have anything to eat at all? Inquired Delia. Being terribly hungry herself, she could sympathize with the hungry beast. Oh, answered the lion without opening his eyes. We did have a few square meal tablets the wizard happened to have in his pocket. But while they fill you up, they don't seem to satisfy. Same with the food here, said Delia. Food? The Cowardly Lion's nose began to twitch with eagerness. Where is any? If I am not mistaken, supper is approaching now, announced the Scarecrow, peering out through the side draperies of the canopy. Is this one of your many servants, my dear?" "Oh, I suppose so," said Delia, as Bittsywittle trudged up the crystal steps, balancing a huge tray on his head. He had been warned of the change in strut, but the sight of the huge monster on the throne unnerved the little fellow, and he began to tremble so violently the dishes on the tray danced a regular jig. "Just put the tray on the table," directed Delia patiently. "And don't jump, Bittsywittle. Strut won't bite you." "How do you know I won't?" roared the Cowardly Lion, opening his eyes so wide Bittsywittle set down the tray and scuttled off like a hare. Without much enthusiasm, Jelly noted Kabebe had sent them 6 saucers of wind pudding and 6 glasses of air-ade. "Don't touch it," warned the soldier with green whiskers, as the lion slithered off the throne and ambled to the table. "It will make you feel very funny." "Well, I'd rather feel funny than sad," said the lion, sniffing the pudding delicately. "And I'd rather feel funny than starve. Aren't you having any, Delia?" "No, thank you." Delia shook her head sharply and exchanged a quiet wink with Wantowin. But the Cowardly Lion did not notice the wink, or at least he pretended not to, and hurriedly lapped up all 6 saucers. "Why, it's delicious," he murmured rapturously. "Delish." "Hey, where are you going?" The Scarecrow had been watching him enviously, for the pink pudding looked so good he almost wished he found it necessary to eat. But now he spun round in alarm, for, without any warning at all, the lion had swelled and puffed up like a carnival balloon, and gone wafting upward to soar in dizzy circles over their heads. "Oh, he's just putting on airs because he's king," teased Delia, wishing Dorothy were awake to enjoy the fun. But he might easily float off, worried the Scarecrow, pursuing the luckless lion with outstretched arms. "Wait, I'll save you," he puffed, and snatching the cord from a long bell pull, he leaped on Strut's throne. After several unsuccessful attempts, he managed to lasso the lion and tie him fast to the arm of the throne. "How do you feel?" he called solicitously, for the lion, with closed eyes and a desperate expression, was paddling his legs like a drowning dog. "Oh, take it easy," advised Delia, relenting a little. "You'll float around all by yourself and come down presently, as light as a feather. I know, 'cause I've tried it. Hello, here's Hippenscop. Now, I wonder what he wants. Oh, my goodness, he's actually brought me 2 of those flying sticks." "Flying sticks?" exclaimed the Scarecrow, sliding off Strut's throne. "You don't tell me." The messenger, by this time, had reached the top step of the pavilion. After a fearful look at the people from Oz, he advanced timidly toward Delia. "I have brought the flying sticks, your Majesty!" exclaimed Hippenscop, holding them out with great pride and satisfaction. "I stole them from 2 sleeping watchmen, and managed to bring them here without Kabebe seeing me." "Kabebe?" said Julia with an uncomfortable start. "Why, where is Kabebe?" "In Star Park," whispered the messenger hoarsely. "She's got all the people worked up and excited. They're coming here presently to blow you away." "What?" gasped Delia in an exasperated voice. "Again? Why, she knows Strut will never allow that." "But Kabebe says he isn't Strut," said the messenger, with an apologetic bow toward the Cowardly Lion, who, paying no attention to the conversation, was floating in distracted circles above the throne. "Now, Junnenrump and I believe your Majesty, and consider you the best and prettiest Starina Stratovania ever had. But no one else does, so first they are going to blow away the friend ship, and then they are coming here to blow you all away. So, while I do not presume to give orders, if I were in your Majesty's place, I'd fly this very instant, and while there is still time." "The boy is right," declared the soldier, grabbing up his blunderbuss. "Company, fall in, forward, march!" wake up, cried the Scarecrow, pummeling the wizard with both hands. The Airlanders are destroying our Ozoplane. While Delia, really touched by the messenger's loyalty, gave him one of her emerald rings. Wantowin Battles lifted Dorothy off the sofa and set her hastily on her feet. Forward, forward, he urged, pushing her ahead of him. Kabebi's coming to blow us away. Dorothy, blinking her eyes after a look at the cowardly lion floating over the throne, concluded she still was dreaming. But the soldier kept shaking her till she finally realized she was awake and in danger. "This way," cried Delia as the wizard bounced off his cushions. "This way. The thing for us to do is to run to the other side of the aerosphere. Then, while those villains are blowing the Ozpril away, we can be reaching the edge and—" "And what?" queried Dorothy, looking at Delia with round, scared eyes. Delia, for reasons of her own, did not answer. The Scarecrow already had retrieved his balloons. Now he pressed the cord, still attached to the cowardly lion, into Wantowin's hand. "You must pull him along with you," directed the Scarecrow earnestly. "I am too light, and do let's be starting." The angry buzz of the crowd on its way to Half Moon Lake already could be heard. So, without stopping to plan or reason, the travelers from Oz slipped through the back curtains of the royal pavilion and began running as fast as they could toward the other side of the Strut's curious air realm. The wizard, grasping his kit bag in one hand and Dorothy by the other, went first. Next came Delia, carrying the 2 flying sticks. The Scarecrow clutched his bunch of balloons. Last of all ran Wantowin, dragging the growling and disgusted lion after him through the air. Fortunately, Stratovania is long and narrow. In less time than they had dared hope, the little cavalcade came to the edge. Forbidding cliffs stretched along the whole coast, and the moist blue air seemed actually to be breaking in great waves against the rocks. As they all gazed unhappily outward, a terrific boom made them shudder. "Well, there goes the Ozpril," mourned Delia, patting the wizard compassionately on the shoulder. The wizard, looking very angry and grim, nodded his head. "Come on," puffed Delia, stepping closer to the cliffs. "Unless we want to go up with the ship, we've got to jump. And really, it's not so bad as it sounds. I've seen the Airlanders fly with these winged staffs, and these 2 will have to do for us all." "How do they work?" asked Dorothy in a faint voice. "Why, you tap them once on the ground to start, and once on the handle to stop," explained Delia breathlessly. "Now, suppose Dot and I and the Scarecrow ride one, and Wiz and the soldier the other. And for cake's sake, don't let go of our lion," added Delia. "But suppose he deflates and pulls us all down with his weight," groaned the soldier. "Why can't he float along by himself?" "Because I'm not going to have it," said Delia determinedly. "You must hold on to him and risk whatever happens. And if anything does happen, the wizard will think of something." "I have thought of something," said the wizard composedly. "But first we must do as Delia says. Hark! Isn't that Kabebi calling you?" As a matter of fact, it was. The Stratovanians, after witnessing the blow-off of the Ozpril, had rushed back to the royal pavilion. Furious at the disappearance of their victims, they were now rushing toward the crystal cliffs, the screams of Kabebi rising above all the rest. "What do we do? Ride 'em like broomsticks?" jabbered the Scarecrow, as Delia, with shaking hands, held out one of the sticks to the wizard. "A good idea," approved the little magician, watching with deep interest as the wings on the tip of the staff opened and spread. "Come along, soldier, or the mob will get you yet." With wildly beating hearts, Dorothy and Delia watched the wizard and the soldier mount the flying stick and boldly leap from the cliff's edge. The cowardly lion let out a terrific howl as he was dragged after them, but Delia, Dorothy, and the Scarecrow, without further hesitation, mounted their own staff and hurled themselves into space, just as the queen and her cohorts came panting into view. End chapter 11.
Chapter 12 of Ozoplaning with the Wizard of Oz. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Laquan Smith. Chapter 12. The Flight to Oz. Keeping the flying sticks in more or less a level position so they would not slip off, and at the same time pointing them downward, required no little skill. The wizard, being used to magical appliances, mastered his in double-quick time, but Delia, who sat in front on the other staff, soared up for 70 feet and across for 50 before she learned the trick to flying it. During the first 20 minutes of their flight, not a word was spoken. Each had enough to do to hold on, and the Cowardly Lion, hurtling through the air beside the soldier with green whiskers, looked the picture of despair and discouragement. A dozen times Dorothy, after a glance downward, gave herself up for lost, but gradually the strangeness of their situation wore off. Passing out of the moist, clammy strata just below Strut's kingdom into a drier and less clouded area, the spirits of the little band of adventurers rose. The wings of each flying staff, though not large, were powerful as airplane propellers, and they flapped as rhythmically as the wings of a bird. "Not exactly like riding in an Ozoplane," called the wizard, wavering cheerfully at Delia. "Still, it's better than falling, eh?" Delia, who had maneuvered her staff to a position close to his, nodded emphatically. "What worries me is the altitude," she called back presently. "Somewhere or other we lost our air helmets. Will the effects of those altitude pills wear off before we're out of the strat?" "No, we'll be all right," promised the wizard. "My altitude pills condition one for the upper areas for several days at a time." "Oh, then everything's splendid," sighed Delia, pushing back her curly locks and smiling at Dorothy. "Unless we meet a meteor, and then our flight will soon be over," quavered the Scarecrow, waving his arm in a doleful circle. Now, don't anticipate," advised the wizard, guiding the staff with one hand and opening his kit bag with the other. For several moments he had been anxiously regarding the Cowardly Lion. The buoyancy resulting from the wind puddling was at last subsiding, and the swelled and bloated appearance of the unfortunate beast was fast disappearing. At almost any time now, the lion would become a dead weight. His poundage, added to the wizards and the soldiers, would be too much for the flying staff, and they all would plunge like plummets to the earth. Feeling hurriedly around in the kit bag, the wizard pulled out a small black bottle. Uncorking it with his teeth, he turned it upside down and held it out at arm's length until not a drop of its oily contents remained. "Now, don't be alarmed at a sudden bump," he warned, as his companions watched him with surprising curiosity. "Whatever happens, hold on to your staff." Scarcely had the wizard issued his warning when the air directly beneath them froze into a solid block of blue ice, on which they landed with a series of bumps and began sliding around in great confusion. "Nothing to worry about, nothing to worry about," panted the wizard, keeping a firm hold on his flying stick and at the same time managing to extract a large envelope from the kit bag. "Hold on to your stick, Delia, and keep it down." The Cowardly Lion, completely deflated by his smack against the ice, was sprawled flat as an animal skin in the center of the berg. Dismounting from his own staff, the wizard scurried perilously around the edges of the rapidly falling block of ice, scattering seeds from his envelope with a lavish hand. Instantly, or so it seemed to Dorothy, a thick green hedge sprang up, enclosing them snugly inside. "To keep us from tumbling off," explained the wizard, sliding anxiously after Wanto and Battles, who was galloping round and round on his flying stick like a child on a merry-go-round. "Whoa, whoa!" cried Ozma's chief magician, grabbing the soldier's coattails. "We need these sticks to act as brakes to stop our fall." Unseating the soldier, the wizard lifted the flying stick and stuck it through the top branches of the hedge. Bidding the others dismount their staff, he thrust it through the hedge on the opposite side. The wings of both staffs kept up their steady beating, and, as the wizard had predicted, acted as strong brakes on the plunging cake of ice. "I was afraid we'd lose the lion," explained the wizard as the little company of adventurers gathered breathlessly around him. "I'd just as lief be lost as frozen." Sneezing plaintively, the lion pulled himself to his feet and slid over to the hedge, bracing his back against its stouter branches. It won't be long before we strike solid earth now, old fellow, the wizard observed brightly.
Strike the earth,
roared the lion.
Well, goodbye, friends. I'll say it now before I'm squashed and scattered to the 4 points of the compass.
Never mind, you'll make a lovely splatter, teased the scarecrow. Better stamp your feet, girls, to keep from freezing. Here, stand on my coat, offered the wizard gallantly. Not you! Indignantly, he pushed the soldier with green whiskers aside. You can stand on your own coat.
But it's against regulations for a soldier to appear without his jacket, shivered Wantowin piteously. The manual of arms says...
How about the manual of feet? Snorted the scarecrow. Thankfully, he was stuffed of cotton and incapable of feeling the cold. Say, Wiz, I guess this is about the oddest flying trip a band of explorers ever had. Did those magic drops freeze the air into ice? Called Dorothy. And how did you grow the hedge so fast? Yes, the drops froze the air, the wizard bawled back, for the rush of air as they shot downward made it difficult to hold polite conversation. And I just happened to have some of my instant sprouting saplings in the kit bag. To keep their spirits, they continued to shout back and forth as they fell. I don't suppose we'll ever catch up with Strut and Nick Chopper now? Screamed Delia, hooking her arm securely through the hedge. Why not? Cried the wizard. As soon as we land, we can fly these flying sticks through to the Emerald City, and be there before the October arrives. Remember now, the first one up after we hit the earth is to snatch a winged staff. And how do you suppose we'll be able to rise after striking the earth at 140 miles an hour? Roared the lion, a trifle sarcastically. Well, it won't hurt me, boasted the scarecrow, holding to his hat with both hands. He had lost the balloons long ago. And I promise to pick up the rest of you as soon as possible. Is there anything in the kit bag for breaks, sprains, or bruises, Wiz? Oh, hold your tongue, snapped Delia, trying to peer over the hedge. We're not going to crash at all. We'll probably get stuck on a steeple or a tower. How'd Nick manage with his flying? Shrieked the wizard, who was anxious to change the subject. The less said about their landing, the better. Of course, they could take the flying sticks and abandon the cowardly lion, but that did not seem exactly sporting, so he resolutely put the thought of it out of his mind. Grand, just grand, answered Delia, making a megaphone of her hands. Nick had the Oztober going smoothly as a swallow. That's good, boomed the wizard, beating his arms against his breast to keep warm. Maybe he'll get the best of Strut yet and bring the Oztober safely down. I'd certainly like to have one ship left to present to Ozma. How long will it be before we do get down? Called Dorothy as the wizard paused for breath. Seems to me we're falling faster. Faster and faster. Any minute now, predicted the wizard, popping his head over the top of the hedge. Oh! He shouted joyfully. We're coming down right in the middle of a great big splash. Before the wizard could finish his sentence, the block of ice struck the smooth surface of a large mountain lake and went completely under. As it came bobbing to the top, its drenched and shivering passengers looked at one another with mingled dismay and relief. Dorothy, picking up the wizard's coat, handed it back and then went slipping and sliding over to help the scarecrow, who was too water-soaked and sodden even to move. Wring me out! Hang me up to dry, somebody! Gurgled the straw man dismally. Grrrah! The cowardly lion, outraged at the cold plunge after all the other shocks and indignities of the day, jumped over the hedge and began to swim grimly for the shore. The soldier with green whiskers, better at carrying out orders than the orders, already was pulling one of the flying sticks from the hedge. As it came loose, he took a brief glance over the top, gave an agonized shriek, and fell backwards, stepping all over the wizard, who was just behind him. An army! Shivered Wantowin, clutching his dripping beard. Thousands of them! It is an army, too, echoed Delia, who had parted the hedge to have a look for herself. What do they look like? Demanded the wizard, shoving past the soldier and grabbing the winged staff, which was on the point of flying off by itself. Like trouble, said Delia, reaching for Dorothy's hand. They have long bows and red-pointed beards, and, my goodness, their beards are pointed straight at us. Bearded bowmen, eh? Grunted the wizard. Well, that doesn't prove they're unfriendly. The wizard stuck his head over the hedge, barely avoiding the arrow that sped past his ear. I suppose you'd call that friendly, sniffed Delia, flopping on her stomach and pulling Dorothy down with her. The wizard had no time to answer, for Wanto in battles had one of the wing staffs and was preparing to ride by himself. Drop it! Drop it at once, commanded the wizard sharply. How dare you fly off without us? Why, it's plain desertion, that's what. I was just going to do a bit of reconnoitering, mumbled the soldier, looking terrible abashed, and then diving to a place beside Delia as 3 more arrows came hissing over the hedge. Quickly recovering the staff, the wet little wizard crouched down. Now, girls, he directed, panting from the exertion of holding down both sticks. When I give the signal, you and the Scarecrow mount one staff, and Wanto and I will mount the other, and fly high over the enemy lines. The higher the better, said Delia, as a perfect shower of arrows whizzed over their heads. End of chapter 12.
Chapter 13 of Ozoplaning with the Wizard of Oz. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Paul Nelson. Ozoplaning with the Wizard of Oz by Ruth Plumly Thompson. Chapter 13. The King of the Kudgers. The wizard's plan worked very well at first. He and the soldier astride one stick, Dorothy and Delia holding the poor, sodden scarecrow between them on the other, shot high into the air, across the lake, and over the amazed ranks of the bowmen drawn up on the bank. Before the Redbeards had recovered from their surprise, the travelers were winging strongly toward the turreted red castle that crowned the mountaintop. The Cowardly Lion, to escape the flying arrows, had swum underwater. Now, scrambling up the bank, he neatly skirted the enemy and ran swiftly beneath the 2 flying staffs. As soon as we're safely past this castle, we'll descend, rest, dry our clothes, and then proceed to the Emerald City, called the wizard, turning to wave encouragingly at the 2 girls. But at that moment, a dreadful thing happened. Sprawled on a huge camp chair on the sloping terrace before the castle, its huge, red-bearded owner suddenly sighted the flying sticks and their riders. Seizing the long bow that lay beside him on the grass, he sent 2 arrows speeding upward, one right after the other. Each arrow found its mark and splintered a flying stick. With spine-shattering suddenness, the travelers crashed to the earth. Dorothy, describing it to Ozma later, explained that although she had never been in a battle, she knew exactly how a warrior felt when his horse was shot from under him. Except, of course, that a horseman would not have had so far to fall. The Scarecrow, tumbling off first, softened the bump for both the girls. The wizard and soldier plunged headlong into a red pepper bush. While not seriously injured, they were grievously scratched and shaken. But the worst was not the blow to their pride in persons. The worst was to see the upper and winged halves of their precious sticks flying away without them. "Ow! Ow!" groaned the wizard, leaping out of the pepper bush and running for an anguished yard or 2 after the vanishing staffs. "This is awful! Awful! Come back! Come down!" he implored, realizing even as he shouted that the sticks could neither hear nor obey. "Now then, who are you?" The startled Redbeard hoisted himself out of his camp chair. "Wi' itches, riding on broomsticks? Now then, call off you a dog." The Cowardly Lion, noting the mischief already done by the Red King's bow, had seized it in his teeth and backed rapidly into the bushes. The wizard, reluctantly withdrawing his gaze from the sky, now stamped over to the astonished owner of the castle. "Just see what you've done!" he cried angrily. "Destroyed the only wing staffs in Oz. We flew them all the way from the Strat, and now how are we to reach the Emerald City in time to stop the Airlanders? Don't you realize? But how could you?" In sudden discouragement, the wizard broke off and stared despondently around the rugged mountaintop. "I must tell you," he began again in a hoarse and desperate voice, "that Ozma and the Emerald City are in great danger. Strut of the Strat and a host of his flying Stradivarians are descending to conquer Oz and carry off Ozma's treasure. If we fail to warn her, the city is lost. Doomed, I tell you. Since you have shattered our flying sticks, you must quickly supply us with some other means of travel. We must reach the capital before morning." "Must!" roared the bearded bowman. "Are you shouting must at me?" "Be careful," cried Dorothy, for the wizard, in his earnestness, had stepped closer and closer to the Red King. But her cry was too late. Without any warning, the king's pointed beard, rising with his wrath, pointed straight out and struck the valiant wizard to the earth. For a whole minute he lay perfectly still, staring up at this curious phenomenon. Though he had seen many a beard in his day, he had never been knocked down by one before. "Who are you?" demanded the burly mountain monarch again. "How dare you fly over my castle and swim in my lake without permission?" Stroking his beard, which gradually resumed a vertical position on his chest, he stared from one to the other of the adventurers. "No use to run," he sneered, as wont-to-win battles began to back toward the bushes. "My bowmen will be here any moment now. But who are you?" "Who?" groaned Delia, propping the bedraggled scarecrow against a rock. A body'd hardly know after such a welcome. "Who are you yourself, you old Redbeard?" "I?" roared the bowman, taken completely by surprise. "Why don't you know? I am Bustabo, king of the Cudgers and Red Top Mountain." "I don't believe it," said the wizard, leaping agilely to his feet and shaking his fist under Bustabo's long nose. "A real king would not treat travelers as you have done, shoot away valuable flying sticks, and keep two lovely girls standing out here in the wind." "How do you know what a king would do?" demanded Bustabo, puckering his forehead in an uneasy frown. "Because," stated the wizard, folding his arms disdainfully, "I personally know all the most important rulers in Oz, and none of them would behave as you have done. If you are a king, act like a king." "Who are you?" repeated the ruler of Red Top, walking around the little group with hands clasped behind his back. "Oh, for Oz's sake, tell him," snarled the Cowardly Lion, poking his head out of the bushes. "If he asks that question again, I might eat him up, pointed beard and all." "Well, this is the Wizard of Oz," explained Dorothy, as the lion stalked grimly out of the bushes. "Chief Magician for Ozma of Oz. This," Dorothy, with a wave of her hand, indicated the trembling soldier, "this is Wont-to-Win Battles, the Grand Army of Oz. Beside him is our famous live scarecrow. I am Princess Dorothy of Oz, and this is Delia Jam, First Lady-in-Waiting to Ozma. Coming toward you is the Cowardly Lion of Oz." "He doesn't look very cowardly to me," muttered Bustabo, putting the camp chair between himself and the approaching beast. "Oh, but I am cowardly," growled the lion growlishly. "And when I'm frightened, I never know what I'll do. I might even chew up the king of this mountain. Who ever heard of a king pointing his beard at harmless travelers? Who ever heard of a king with a beard as hard and as red as yours anyway? It's as hard as iron from the looks of it." "Harder," agreed the king, evidently considering the lion's remark as a compliment. "All we Cudgers have red beards, not of soft hair like this." The Red King gazed contemplatively at the soldier with green whiskers. "But of hard hair, like mine. I don't suppose you've ever seen a beard like this before. The point's sharp as a dagger, too," he warned, as the lion sprang a pace closer. "Oh, I'm sure it is," said Dorothy nervously, "and it's dreadfully handsome, too. But could your Majesty please let us dry out in your castle, and then you could show us the quickest route to the Emerald City? If you don't," finished Dorothy, clasping her hands anxiously, "the ruler of this whole country of Oz may be captured and carried to the Strat." "What do I care about the ruler of Oz?" sniffed Bustabo, scratching his head in a most unkingly manner. "Ozma never does anything for me. Even if she were conquered, I'd still have my mountain. Why should I help you, or her, or them?" His scornful wave included the whole little group. "What can you do for me?" he asked sullenly. "Can you sing?" His dull eye brightened momentarily as it rested inquiringly on Dorothy.
Well, a little,"
confessed Dorothy, smoothing down her damp dress. Clearing her throat and fixing her eye on the top of a red pine, she started in a rather choked voice. Oh, bright and gay is the land of Oz. We love its lakes and hills because... There, that will do. Bustabo snapped his fingers impatiently, and taking out a little book, scribbled hastily, Can't sing. Can you dance? He demanded, addressing himself to Delia. We are short of good dancers on this mountain. Delia, by this time, was in such a state of cold and temper, she stamped her foot and turned her back on the unmannerly monarch. Can't dance, wrote Bustabo under the first entry. Well then, what do you do? He asked, turning in exasperation to the wizard. I, said the wizard, twirling his water-soaked topper, I am a wizard. Naturally, I supposed a king like yourself would have everything he desired. But if that is not the case, tell me what you wish, and perhaps I can help you. Only be quick, he added earnestly, for we have no time to lose. So, you really are a wizard? Bustabo's expression became almost agreeable. Well then, he drew himself up pompously, the princess whom I wish to wed has unaccountably disappeared. Find and return her to this castle, and I will speed you and your friends to the Emerald City by the safest and swiftest route. But that would take too much time, objected the wizard, rubbing his chin anxiously. Who is the princess? Why is she gone? What is her name, and what does she look like? If you were a real wizard, you would know all these things without my telling you, answered Bustabo, looking suspiciously at Ozma's chief magician. I'll tell you this much, though. The princess whom I would marry is called Azarine the Red. Not 3 days ago she was in this castle, but on the morning of our wedding day she ran off into the forest, and though all my bowmen have been searching ever since, not a trace of her have they found. Humph, the girl showed very good sense if you ask me, sniffed the Cowardly Lion, shaking his mane. What did you do? Point your beard at her? Come on, Wiz, let's go. We're just wasting time here. Aha! But you cannot leave. Look behind you. Bustabo, with an enormous laugh, pointed over his shoulder. Silently as Indians, the bearded bowmen had crept up and entirely surrounded the little company on the green. Standing in a circle with bows raised and beards pointed, they fairly dared anyone to take a step. So, then, it's all settled. The Red King clapped the wizard heartily on the back. Don't think I have not heard of your skill, Mr. Wizard. Even here on Red Top, we've heard rumors of the wonderful Wizard of Oz. Now all you have to do is walk into that forest, find the princess, and bring her back to me. Meanwhile, I shall treat these others as my guests. They shall rest and warm themselves and have all they wish to eat. If by morning you have failed to return, I shall regretfully be forced to throw them off the mountain. If you do return, you will find that Bustabo will keep his word and bargain. The wizard hardly knew what to say. If he knows so much, why does he not help himself? Demanded one of the Redbeards, stepping insolently out of the circle. People who can fly through the air on icebergs and sticks do not need help from ordinary folk like us. Why doesn't he fly to the Emerald City if he's so smart? I'll tell you why. Because he's not the Wizard of Oz. He's a fraud. That's what. If he's a fraud, then you're a rascal, cried Delia Jam, remembering suddenly that she recently had been a Starina. Your princess is as good as found, Mr. King. Isn't that so, wizard? Meeting Delia's firm gaze, the wizard nodded quickly. This young Ozmaid is right, your majesty. Before the sun rises, Azarine will return to the castle. Yes, and now bid your vassals lead us into the castle, ordered Delia sharply. Bring us soup, meat, bread, vegetables, salad, and plenty of fruit cake. Bustabo, after a long look both at Delia and the wizard, motioned for the bowmen to lead the visitors into the castle. The Cowardly Lion trailed suspiciously along in the rear, keeping a sharp watch to see that no beards were pointed at his friends. The wizard accompanied them part way, conversing in earnest whispers with Delia and Dorothy. Wantowin Battles supported the dripping and still helpless Scarecrow, and each tried not to show the anxiety he felt when the wizard finally turned to leave them. "Goodbye, all," he said, lifting his dripping hat. "Goodbye, Delia. Here is your bag." Tapping the kit bag significantly, he pressed it into Delia's cold hands. Then, without a word to Bustabo or his henchmen, he strode resolutely toward the dark forest that covered the sides and more than half of the top of the mountain. Relenting a little, the Red King sent a bowman running after him with a basket of provisions. Taking the basket with a brief nod of thanks, the wizard waved again to his friends and marched straight into the gloomy and forbidding woods. End of Chapter 13.
Chapter 14 of Ozoplaning with the Wizard of Oz. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by M.J. Green. Ozoplaning with the Wizard of Oz by Ruth Plumly Thompson. Chapter 14. Azarin the Red. The late afternoon shadows made the forest seem even gloomier. The little wizard, trudging along under the rustling red trees, hands thrust deep into his pockets, never had felt more depressed or unhappy. He had hated to leave his friends with a monarch as cruel and untrustworthy as Bustabo. Still, he had the utmost confidence in Delia Jam. The young Oz Miss doubtless had some plan in her clever little head, and had chosen this way for him to escape, meaning to follow with the others at the first opportunity. Anyway, he reflected, dropping down on a heap of fallen leaves and resting his back against a tree, they had the kit bag to help them if worst came to worst. Perhaps if he concentrated and thought very hard, he could recall the powerful incantation for locating missing persons and articles. But a wizard without his books and equipment is almost as helpless as a doctor without his pills and medicine bag. Try as he would, the wizard could not remember the proper combination of words to bring back the missing princess. His short nap in Stratovania had rested him a little, but he still was dreadfully weary from his grueling flight and the recent shocks and mischances. The loss of the Ozpril had been the worst blow of all, and now his tired brain simply refused to work. So, sitting sadly under the tree, he munched the sandwiches from the basket, drank from the bottle of cold tea, and wished fervently for a fire to warm himself, for his clothes were still damp and clammy from the dive into Bustabo's lake. It comforted him a little to know that the others were drying out and enjoying a good supper in the castle, but it was no comfort at all to realize that Strut and his legions were winging their way toward the Emerald City, the city he had built and lived in so long it seemed more like home than any place he had known in America. The wizard crammed the rest of the sandwiches into the basket and started recklessly through the forest, tripping over tough vines and rocks, bumping into trees, and peering desperately about for traces of a princess or for any sign that might tell him in which direction the Emerald City lay. From the slant of the ground, he knew he was traveling down the mountain, and the deep red foliage told him he was somewhere in the Quadling country of Oz. But with night coming on and the shadows growing deeper and darker, he probably would lose his way entirely and never get out of the forest at all. He felt uneasy at leaving his comrades behind in the Red King's castle. Was it better to try to save Ozma and the Emerald City, or to stay in this forest and help Dorothy and Delia and the devoted friends who had embarked on this unexpected adventure with him? Stopping short, the wizard pressed both hands to his forehead in an effort to make up his mind. Night already had overtaken him, and it was now so dark it was impossible to see more than a foot or so in any direction. Occasional roars, the snapping of twigs, and the gleam of yellow eyes from the thicket caused him no little anxiety. At an especially savage roar, he he suddenly stopped worrying about Ozma and the others and began to do considerable worrying about himself. How humbling for a wizard to be devoured by a hungry beast. Backing softly away from the approaching monster, he began looking sharply about for a hollow tree, a cave, or even a clump of bushes where he might conceal himself. On the tip of his tongue, and ready for instant use, was the magic word which would render him invisible. Fortunately, he did remember that. But the wizard never wasted words, magic or otherwise. Resolving to wait till the last possible moment, he continued to back rapidly and cautiously. Then, unexpectedly from behind him came another distraction, the clear ringing of a silver bell. At the same time, the gloom was pierced by a dancing ray of light. Swinging round, the wizard flung up both arms, and not knowing whether to dash into the teeth of the monster in front of him or risk the lowered horns of the beast behind him, the startled magician uttered the word that rendered him invisible. "Brrr!" raged the burly, bear-like creature, rearing up on his hind legs. "Where is that pesky man-creature? I saw him a moment ago, but now, though I still catch his scent, he is hidden from me. And why must you, Shagomar, come horning in to spoil my supper? Why cannot you mind your own business?" "Brrr! I am minding my own business," roared the creature addressed as Shagomar. "Away, you entomophagus monster! Haven't I told you time and again to keep away from the cave of the princess? The very next bugbear that comes prowling round shall have a taste of my antlers. Get on with you now, and after this, leave harmless travelers alone." The great red stag made a short rush at the ugly beast blocking his path. Large as a grizzly, half insect and half bear, it held its ground uncertainly for a moment, then shuffled off into the darkness, grunting angrily. The wizard, who had jumped hastily from between the two beasts, had listened to the stag's words with lively interest and astonishment. Huge and sandy, with antlers of tremendous breadth, the huge creature now stood quiet as a statue. From one antler prong hung a flashing silver lantern. From another dangled the bell which had so startled the wizard. "Well, friend, are you still there?" whispered the stag softly. Instead of answering, the wizard uttered the word that would make him visible. "Come with me," directed the stag, showing neither surprise nor curiosity at the wizard's sudden reappearance. "You will be safer with us in the cave. Surely you are a stranger on Red Top, or you would know it is dangerous to wander in this forest at night." "Oh, I don't mind danger," said the wizard, striding sturdily beside the stag. "I am used to danger. And I must reach the Emerald City before morning. Ozma and her whole capital are threatened by a band of ruthless airlanders, and unless I can give them some warning, the Emerald City certainly will be captured by Strut of the Strat. I am Ozma's chief magician, fallen by great misfortune into this forest." "I thought you might be a wizard," murmured Shagomar, pausing to nibble at a few tender leaves. "And you say the ruler of the whole land of Oz is in danger? How well, we all have our troubles." Exhaling his breath noisily, Shagomar looked off between the trees with a troubled frown. "I cannot direct you to the Emerald City, but I'm sure the princess can help you." "What princess do you mean?" asked the wizard, curious to hear what Shagomar would say. "Azarin," whispered the stag, looking around carefully to see that no one was listening. "Azarin the Red, ruler of Red Top Mountain." "But I thought Bustabo was ruler of the mountain. I just came from his castle," sputtered the wizard. "He certainly told me he was king of the Kudgers." King of the Kudgers. Phooey. The stag shook his head as if a bee were in his ear, while his bell played a regular roundelay. Bustabo was, till a week ago, chief bowman in Her Majesty's Guard. Using his position and his men to help him, he has wickedly seized Azarin's throne, insisting that Azarin permit him to be the king of all the Kudgers. When our little princess refused, she was locked up in the tower. But with the assistance of a faithful servant, she managed to escape and has been hiding in this forest ever since. I, being an old and trusted friend, have been looking out for her and will protect her with horn and hoof until her own loyal subjects unseat this miserable impostor. Phew! So that's the way it is. The wizard thrust his hands more deeply into his pockets. Well, that settles that. I won't do it, no matter what happens. Won't do what? Questioned the stag, looking down sideways at the little man. Oh, nothing. Kicking at a stone, the wizard walked along in a depressed silence. Surely no one ever had been in a worse dilemma. If he managed by a trick or by force to carry Azarin back to the Red Castle, Dorothy and his friends would be released instantly, and all of them speeded on their way to the capital. If he did not return the princess to the castle, his brave and faithful companions would be flung off the mountain. Strut would conquer the Emerald City, and everything would be lost. Lost. But when a few minutes later the stag pushed through a cluster of bushes that concealed the entrance to the cave, and the wizard stepped into the presence of Azarin herself, he knew he never would force her surrender to the infamous Bustabo. Seated pensively on a rough boulder beside a small fire was the prettiest little princess the wizard had almost ever seen. Her hair, long and red as Glinda's, fell in satiny waves to her feet. She wore a little mesh cap of pearls and a white satin princess dress. A long red velvet cloak hung loosely from her shoulders. Not exactly the costume for a cave, but vastly becoming. Azarin's pale and flower-like face was sweet and gentle, and when she saw the wet and weary traveler with Shagomar, she jumped up to welcome him as graciously as though she still were mistress of her castle. "Why, it's the Wizard of Oz!" she cried joyfully after a second look at the guest. "Oh, we all know the Wizard of Oz. I have a picture of you right over the grand piano in my castle. Wherever did you find him, Shaggy dear? Has he come all this way to help us?" "It will be a great pleasure and privilege, if I may," said the wizard, sitting on a rock opposite the princess and placing his high hat between his knees. "Just now I happen to be in as much trouble as your highness, but perhaps—" The wizard looked thoughtfully at the stag standing motionless at the entrance of the cave. "Can Shagomar run?" "Oh, yes, terribly fast," Azarin assured him eagerly. "Faster than eagles can fly, than water can fall down the mountain, faster than any creature on Red Top. Shaggy can do anything." Jumping up, the princess ran over to lean her head against the red stag's shoulder. "He goes to the village each day and returns with food. He has brought me blankets for my bed, pillows for my head, and has kept away the fierce bugbears and all other wild beasts that roam the redwood. I don't know what I should have done without him," the princess added softly. "Shaggy's such a dear." "You're both dears," agreed the wizard. "Are we?" Azarin twinkled her eyes at the wizard. "But Shaggy's the biggest, and we've always been friends, haven't we?" The stag, looking down at Azarin with his bright, steadfast eyes, nodded so vigorously that the bell on his antlers rang a veritable medley, and the rays from the silver lantern danced into every corner of the dreary cavern. "Well, then," the wizard rubbed his hands briskly together, "Shaggy shall carry us straight to the palace of Glinda, the good sorceress of the south. As Red Top Mountain is in the Quadling country, her palace must be somewhere quite near." "Oh, it is," beamed Azarin. "I've often seen her lights from the towers on Red Top. It's just a mile or two from the base of this mountain. I never have seen Glinda, but I've heard she is very good and a powerful sorceress. Do you think she can force Bustabo to give me back my castle and my kingdom?" "I know it," declared the wizard, picking up his hat and clapping it on the back of his head. "But before we start for Glinda's, I must go back and rescue my friends from that thieving Redbeard." Marching forth and back before the fire, the wizard related all that had happened since he and his party had started off in the 2 Ozoplanes. Hearing the strange tale, Azarin almost forgot her own troubles. When the wizard told how Bustabo had broken the winged staffs on which they hoped to ride to the Emerald City, and of the wicked bargain he had driven, the little princess generously offered to return to the Red Castle so that Ozma and Oz might be saved. But the wizard would not hear of such a thing. "No," he decided, "Shaggy and I will go back and manage somehow to release my comrades from the castle. Then we all can start for Glinda's together." "Wait," whistled the stag, who had been listening to the wizard's story with distended eyes and nostrils. "Wait. First I will fetch Dear Dear." "Who in Oz is Dear Dear?" inquired the wizard as Shagomar melted like a shadow through the dark opening of the cavern. "His wife," explained Azarin with an excited skip. "And that will be just splendid, for Dear Dear shall carry all of your friends, and we can ride Shaggy." End chapter 14. Chapter 15 of Ozoplaning with the Wizard of Oz. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by M.J. Green. Ozoplaning with the Wizard of Oz by Ruth Plumly Thompson. Chapter 15. In the Red Castle. And now let us peek into the doings of Delia, Dorothy, and the others after they mournfully watched the wizard stalk off into the forest. With Bowman ahead of them and Bowman closely following, the prisoners marched slowly into the castle. Afraid not to hurry on account of the sharp, pointed beards of the guards, the little party progressed almost at a run. Hurrying them through the beautiful throne room and other cheerful apartments on the first floor, the bowmen lead them to a covered stone stairway curving up from the back courtyard. Up, and up, tramped the bowmen, and up, and up, trudged the weary travelers. It seemed to Dorothy they had climbed 1,000 steps before they reached the top. Both girls were frightened, but holding their backs straight and their chins high, they stepped haughtily along without even a glance at their red-bearded captors. Unlocking an iron door at the head of the stair, the guards gruffly ushered them into a round, stone-walled room at the very top of the tower. Relocking the door just as gruffly, they took their departure. "Thank gooseness there's a fire," shivered Delia, running across the room to hold out her hands to the crackling blaze. "As soon as we're warm and dry, we can decide what to do. Pull up a couple of those benches, want to win. And for cake's sake, don't look so glum. Nobody's been hurt yet." "Ah, but what of the morning?" The soldier with green whiskers wagged his head dismally. "That rogue of a Redbeard will pitch us off this mountain quick as that." Wantowin snapped his cold fingers. "One toss from this tower and we're done," groaned the army, turning away from one of the barred windows with a positive shudder. Glancing out the window nearest her, Dorothy saw that the tower had been built at the very edge of the mountain. Jagged rocks far below, and long dead trees jutting out from the sides of the sheer precipice made it even more formidable. "I'm going to sleep," mumbled the lion, settling himself near the fire. "What I don't see won't make me feel more cowardly." How true, thought Dorothy. Backing away from the window and resolutely keeping her mind off the precipice, she began to help Delia drape the scarecrow over a bench close to the fire. Not too close, girls, begged the straw man nervously. Fire's almost as bad for me as water. One little spark, and poof! Nothing but a bonfire of your old friend and comrade. At this point, a sharp tap on the door made them all jump, but it was only a servant carrying a large tray. At least Bustabo was keeping his promise about supper. The servant was round and jolly. He looked sympathetically at the little company, but evidently was afraid to speak to them. Placing his tray on a table in the center of the room, he bowed stiffly and withdrew, locking the door carefully behind him. Not bad, said Delia, lifting cover after cover from the silver serving dishes. Not bad at all. Give us a hand, Wani, and we'll pull the table over to the fire. My gooseness, this is almost as good as a party. Seating herself next to Dorothy, who already was busy, Delia bit rapturously into a crisp roll. This is the first food I've tasted since we left the Emerald City. Draw up, Liony. This roast lamb will make you forget that wind pudding. You may have all the roast, and we'll manage with the vegetables, the soup, salad, and dessert. Dusk was falling, and the tower room was hardly cheerful, but sitting on their hard benches close to the fire, the prisoners dined almost as well as though they had been in the Emerald City. Now that his hunger was satisfied, even the soldier with green whiskers began to look less desperate. The scarecrow, now completely dry, though a little wrinkled, was his old witty self again. As it grew darker, Delia lit the rusty lantern on the stone mantel, and Wantowin placed another log on the fire. There was a heap of blankets on one of the benches. No other beds being visible, the girls spread several on the hearth. Resting their backs comfortably against the sleeping lion, they conversed in low and guarded whispers. Wantowin, considering it his duty to stand guard, dragged a bench across the doorway. Wrapping himself up in a blanket, he was soon snoring louder than the cowardly lion. The servant had removed the tray, and sounds from below had long since ceased. They knew it must be way past midnight, but Dorothy and Delia were unable to relax. I wonder how the wizard's getting along, mused Dorothy, pulling the blanket a little closer. It must be awfully dark in that forest. Oh, Wiz'll be all right, depend on that. Delia spoke with a heartiness she was far from feeling. He'll have that princess here before sunup. If he doesn't, we'll just light out and find him. Light out? Inquired the scarecrow, drawing back still further from the fire. How do you mean? Yes, echoed Dorothy, moving closer to Delia as a board creaked somewhere below. How do you mean? Oh, I don't just know, admitted Delia frankly, but there might be something in this kit bag to help. Let's have a look, anyway. Dragging it from under a bench where she had stowed it on their arrival, Delia zipped it open and began feeling inside curiously. I never have had a chance to examine it properly, Delia said, but that cheer gas certainly came in handy. And the freezing fluid and sapling seeds were pretty neat, too. My, whatever are these now? Folded neatly on the very top were 4 suits of blue pajamas, with hoods and feet attached like those in an infant's sleeping garment. Holding one near to the blaze so she could read the pink placard on the pocket, Delia gave a little gasp. Oh, listen, she whispered, catching Dorothy's sleeve. It says, These falling out suits have not been tested, but I believe they will work and prove safe and practical in case of accident. Whiz. I suppose the wizard meant them for his Ozoplane passengers to use instead of parachutes, decided Dorothy, fingering one rather doubtfully. Well, I should hate to be the first to try one. Oh, I don't know. Delia, her head on one side, pensively considered the blue pajamas. I think they're real cute. Hark! What was that? Dropping the pajamas, she clutched Dorothy as the unmistakable tread of a heavy boot came stamping up the stair. Bust a bow, shivered Dorothy. Oh, he's not going to wait till morning. He's coming for us now. Oh, Delia, Delia, what shall we do? Dorothy's voice, rising almost to a shriek, roused the Cowardly Lion. Cocking one ear and arriving at exactly the same conclusion as the little girl, the lion sprang over to waken the soldier with green whiskers. The Scarecrow already was hurrying from window to window, trying the bars with his flimsy cotton fingers. At the window nearest the fireplace, he gave a joyful little grunt, for some former prisoner had managed to saw through 3 of the iron bars. As the Scarecrow pushed, they moved creakily outward. "Quick! Come help me!" urged the Scarecrow, dragging the terrified and only half-awake soldier to the window. "On with those parachute suits, girls! We'll jump before we're tossed out." Dorothy and Delia exchanged desperate glances, and then, as the steps on the stair thumped louder and nearer, each grabbed a falling-out suit and zipped herself tidily inside. "Here," panted Delia, down on her hands and knees beside the Cowardly Lion. "You can put your front feet in anyway, and anything will be better than nothing when you fall." To her relief and surprise, she discovered that the pajamas would stretch. Even the lion could wear them without too much discomfort. Except for a cramp in his tail, which was coiled tightly on his back, the lion fitted into his pajamas nicely. As the soldier with green whiskers was trembling too violently to help himself or anyone else, Delia jerked and pushed him into one of the falling-out suits. Then, picking up the wizard's kit bag and looking solemnly back at her anxious comrades, Delia climbed to the window-sill. "I'll go first," she announced, closing her eyes so she would not see the rocks below and her mouth to keep her teeth from chattering. "No, let me. I insist on going first," cried the Scarecrow, springing nimbly up beside Delia. "Falling does not hurt me at all." "Oh, hurry, hurry," begged Dorothy, glancing fearfully over her shoulder. The footsteps were now so loud and near, she expected the door to burst right open and Bustamo's red face to appear. "Goodbye, I'm off." Before the Scarecrow could stop her, Delia was off indeed. Clutching the kit bag to her bosom, she squeezed through the opening between the bars and dove headlong into space. Next, the Scarecrow, with a sad little wave to Dorothy, dropped out of sight. "Help me push this so-called soldier out," puffed Dorothy, as the Cowardly Lion signaled for her to go next. "If we leave him till last, he'll never jump at all." "Halt! About face! Help! Mama! Papa! Help! Help! Help!" wailed Want-to-Win-Battles. But Dorothy relentlessly forced him to the sill and through the opening. As his wildly thrashing legs disappeared over the edge, whoever was coming up the stairs broke into a run. Thump, thump, thumpity-thump. Trembling in every muscle, Dorothy climbed to the sill. Spreading both arms, she launched herself into the air. She heard the grunt of the Cowardly Lion as he forced his way through the opening. Then the fierce rush of wind past her ears as she pitched downward drowned out all other sounds. At first she was sure the wizard's falling-out suits were failures, for the lion plunged past her, falling like a plummet. She, too, was whirling downward so fast she felt sure she would be crushed on the rocks below. Closing her eyes, she tried to resign herself to whatever was coming. Then, suddenly, the pajamas filled with air, ballooning out till she floated lightly as a feather. The question now was, would she ever come down? There was no moon, and in the faint starlight she could make out 3 other bulky shapes spinning through the air just beneath her. By kicking her legs and flapping her arms, Dorothy managed to miss several jutting rocks and tree limbs. As she floated lower, the suit began gradually to deflate, finally letting her down as softly as could be on a strip of sand at the base of the mountain. A little distance away, she could see Delia, already stepping out of her falling-out suit, and the Cowardly Lion, waiting impatiently for someone to help him out of his. Want-to-Win-Battles, very brave now that the danger was past, already had stripped off his flying suit, and was shaking and patting the Scarecrow into shape, for the poor straw man had been completely flattened out by his fall. "Well, how did you like it?" called Delia, hurrying over to help the lion untangle himself. "After the first swoop, it wasn't bad at all. Really, I quite enjoyed it." "Enjoyed it?" choked the lion, looking indignantly from Dorothy to Delia. "I'll never set foot in a plane again as long as I live. Brrr! Ever since we left the Emerald City, we've been falling, flying and blowing about like yesterday's papers. Now that I'm on solid ground at last, I intend to stay there. The rest of you may do as you please, but I shall walk home if it takes a year." "I don't blame you," said Delia, patting the lion soothingly on the nose. "But we can't start without the wizard. We'll have to hide here till morning and then try to find him." "Let him find us," growled the lion, lashing his tail experimentally to see whether there's any wag left in it after the shameful way it had been cramped in the suit. "The whole trip was his idea, not mine." "Oh, hush," warned Dorothy. "Someone will hear you." "Oh, someone has." And sure enough, the faint tinkle of a bell come mysteriously through the gloom. "Mercy! Do you suppose those redbeards have started after us already?" cried Delia, looking around for the kit bag. "But how could they have come down the mountain as fast as we fell?" "They couldn't," whispered the Scarecrow, picking up the bag and handing it to Delia. "But don't worry, my dears. It's probably a herd of goats or cattle. These mountaineers often put bells on their animals. Just keep still and don't move, and they won't notice us at all." Flattening themselves against the rocks at the foot of the mountain, the 5 adventurers waited tensely. But when a huge, shaggy shape loomed out of the darkness and came charging straight toward them, all 5 screamed and started to slither sideways. "Wait! Don't run! Don't be frightened!" begged an agitated voice. "Don't you know me? It's I! It's me! The wizard!" End chapter 15.
Chapter 16 of Ozoplaning with the Wizard of Oz. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Pseudonymous Nerd. Ozoplaning with the Wizard of Oz by Ruth Plumly Thompson. Chapter 16, Escape from the Red Top. As the great stag came to a sliding halt, the rays from his silver lantern cast a wavering light over the little group crouched against the rocks. "Hello! How did you ever escape from the castle?" demanded Ozma's little magician, sliding recklessly off the high back of his steed and embracing them jubilantly. "We were just coming to help you. Girls, Scarecrow, Soldier, Lion, may I present Azarine, the real princess of the mountain, and Shagomar, and dear, her friends." Dorothy and Delia were so stunned by the unexpected appearance of the wizard, they were only able to manage a couple of breathless bows. And indeed, the lovely picture Azarine made, seated demurely on the huge red stag, was enough to render anybody speechless. Shaggy himself was breathtaking too. Not only the lantern and bell hung from his antlers now, but perched unconcernedly on the tallest prong was a lovely white pigeon with a key in its bill. "This pigeon was going to fly up to the tower with the key to the door," explained the wizard, as his 5 comrades continued to gaze at him in stupefied silence. "Fortunately, Azarine, who was imprisoned there before you, had an extra key. She said Gustavo would lock you up in the tower," exclaimed the wizard with a nod at the princess. "But since you already are out and down, we will not need the key. Tell me, how did you manage to escape? What did you do? Break down the door?" "No, we just stepped out of the window," the Scarecrow told him, with a nonchalant wave upward. You mean to say you jumped all this distance? Gasped Azarin, leaning forward to peer between Shaggy's branching antlers, while Delia trotted closer to nudge Dorothy with her soft, moist nose. Well, sort of, explained Delia, putting an arm around the Cowardly Lion, who was still looking extremely sulky. But first we put on those falling out suits, Wiz, and you'll be glad to know they really worked. Splendid, splendid, beamed the Wizard, with a satisfied shake of the head. I'd completely forgotten them, but I'd sure you'd find some useful magic in the kit. Did Bastabo keep his promises? Well, he locked us up in the tower and he gave us a pretty good supper. But we didn't like being prisoners and we didn't feel safe in the castle. Then, a little while ago, we heard him thumping up the stair. We just decided to leave, and so we left. So we see, so we see. The Wizard grinned appreciatively, delighted by the spirit of the two girls. But perhaps we'd better be off. No knowing when Bastabo and his bowmen will be coming to look for you. Shagomar and his dear have agreed to carry us to Castle of Glinda the Good. Once there, Glinda's magic to help me, I'll find some way to deal with Strut and force Bastabo to give up Azarin's throne. Well, I suppose you two girls and the Scarecrow mount Delia. The soldier and I will ride with the princess. Delia, at these words, moved over to a flat rock. Without any trouble at all, Delia and Dorothy climbed to places on her back. Then the Scarecrow vaulted up behind, clasping his arms round Delia to keep from slipping off. When Wantowin and the Wizard had mounted behind Azarin, the two deer swung away from the mountain. With the Cowardly Lion loping easily between, they ran swiftly to the Southlands. Their gait was so smooth that it seemed to Delia they were flying like figures in a dream through a shadowy forest, with only the twinkle of the silver lantern to light their way. As they raced across, Azarin again told the story of Bastabo's trickery and how Shagomar had brought the wizard to her hidden cave. Then the two girls amused the little princess of the story of their experiences in Strat. They told her all about their life at home in the Emerald City and of the curious celebrities who lived in the palace with Ozma. Azarin was already charmed with Scarecrow and the Cowardly Lion, and kept leaning down to have a better look at the tawny beast trotting so unconcernedly between the two deer. I tell you, she proposed generously, I tell you, if Strut destroys the Emerald City, you can all come back and live with me. That is, if Glinda and the wizard can make Bastabo give my castle and kingdom back. But I do hope he'll find some way to stop Strut. How long will it take for him to reach the capital? Dorothy asked across to the wizard. Well, it took us a night and half a day to fly to Stratovania, calculated the little magician, wrinkling his forehead. So I'm afraid Strut and the Tin Woodman left yesterday. They'll be in Emerald City tomorrow. That is today. And it's almost morning now, shivered Delia, glancing off toward the east, where the sky had already showed the first streaks of lavender and rose. Now don't you worry, begged the little wizard, holding fast to his high hat. As soon as we reach Glinda's castle, and I have some proper magic to work with, I'll find a way to make both Strut and Bastabo behave. The few trifles in this kit bag are a help, but not really powerful enough for rascals like those. Look, girls, isn't that Glinda's castle now? Oh, it is, cried Dorothy, clasping Delia around the neck. She was so relieved and happy. And the silver-trimmed towers and spires of Glinda's lovely red castle, shimmering through the early morning mists, were enough to make anyone happy. Flashing around the beautiful gardens and parks, leaping hedges and flower beds as lightly as swallows, the stag and his mate brought the little band of adventurers to the very door of the castle. Goodbye now, breathed the stag. Goodbye. As the wizard and the soldier slipped off his back and the wizard lifted Azarine down, "Take care of my little princess." "Oh, don't go!" cried Dorothy, for Dear seemed on the point of vanishing too. "Do stay and see how it turns out. Later on, wouldn't you like to go to the Emerald City and meet the famous animals who live at the capital?" Shagomar looked questioningly at Dear, and as his pretty little wife seemed interested, he allowed himself to be persuaded. "We'll wait in the garden," he whistled softly. "Houses and castles are too stuffy and shut up for dear people. If you need me, princess, just ring the silver bell." Lowering his head so the princess could slip the bell from his antlers, the stag stood looking at her solemnly. "I will," promised Azarine. Azarine waved her little handkerchief as the two deer sprang away. They actually seemed to float off above the flowers, so easily and lightly did they run. End of chapter 16. Chapter number 17 of Ozoplaning with the Wizard of Oz. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Pseudonymous Nerd. Ozoplaning with the Wizard of Oz by Ruth Plumly Thompson. Chapter 17. The Wizard Gets to Work. "Please announce us to your mistress at once," directed the wizard to the sleepy little castle maid, who presently came in answer to his loud knock. "But Her Highness and Princess Ozma are not here," stuttered the maid, her eyes popping at the sight of visitors so early in the morning. "They left yesterday to visit Prince Tatters and Grandpa in Rockbath." "Ah, well," the wizard turned to the others with a little shrug. "Looks as if I shall have to manage alone. A fortunate thing that Ozma did not start back to the Emerald City. At least she will not fall into Strut's hands. Here! Don't shut the door." The wizard quickly pushed past the little serving maid. "Glinda will wish us to make ourselves comfortable in her absence. Now then, Miss Greta," mumbled the girl, looking bashfully at her feet. "Oh ho, Greta to greet, eh?" chuckled the Scarecrow, taking off his hat and bowing to the ground. "Well now, my dear Miss Greta, would you kindly show these young ladies suitable apartments and tell the cook to prepare breakfast for 6. "Make it 12, growled the Cowardly Lion with a little bounce toward the maid. "I could eat 6 all by myself." Yes, sirs," quavered Greta, running off so fast she lost one of her red slippers. "Never mind," laughed Dorothy. "Delia and I know this castle as well as our own. We'll show Azarine about and have time for a short nap before breakfast." The 100 pretty girls who acted as Glinda's maids-in-waiting were still asleep. In fact, no one was stirring in the castle except a few servants. Waving briskly to the girls as they started up the marble stairway, the wizard went striding towards the red study, where the sorceress kept all her books on witchcraft, her magic potions, her fields, and her appliances. The exquisite palace of Glinda, over which Azarine was exclaiming at every step, was an old story to the Cowardly Lion. Throwing himself upon a huge bearskin, he soon was in a doze and making up the sleep that he had lost on the 2 previous nights. Wanto in battles had once gone off to waken an old soldier crony of his who drilled Glinda's girl guard, and the Scarecrow, about to follow the wizard into the study, paused to look at the great record book. This book, fashioned with golden chains to a marble table in the reception room of the castle, records each event as it happens in the land of Oz. When Linda goes on a journey, she usually locks the record book and takes the key with her. But this time she had neglected to do so, and sentences were popping up row after row on the empty pages. As he bent over to peruse the latest entry, the Scarecrow's painted blue eyes almost popped from his cotton head. Fierce airlanders from the upper strat are descending in the Emerald City of Oz, read the straw man, nearly losing his balance. If measures of defense are not taken at once, the capital will fall under the fierce attack of the invaders. "Whiz!" yelled the Scarecrow. "You whiz!" he said, taking a furious slide into the study. "Hurry, hurry, hurry! For the love of Oz, hurry, or Strat will blow Ozma's castle into Strat!" "The record book says so!" he panted, grabbing Wizard's arm to steady himself. The Wizard, working over the delicate apparatus on a long table, looked up with an anxious frown. Now, you must be a little patient," he told the Scarecrow earnestly. "I'm hurrying just as ever fast as I can." "But what do you propose to do?" demanded the Scarecrow, puckering his forehead into almost 40 deep wrinkles. "Can't you whiz those Stratovanians away or send them back to where they came from?" "Not without Ozma's magic belt," sighed the Wizard. "And you know perfectly well that the belt is back in Emerald, safe in the castle." "Then can't you transport the safe here?" asked the Scarecrow, playing a frantic little tune on the edge of the table. "Just what I'm trying to do," admitted the Wizard, turning a lever here and a wheel there. "But this triple-edged Zentomatic transporter of Glinda's does not seem to be working as it should. I'll probably be able to fix it in a little while, but meantime I'll tell you what to do. Post yourself beside that record book, and the minute it announces Strut's arrival in Emerald City, rush straight back here to me." Before he had finished his sentence, the Scarecrow man was gone, and for the next 2 hours the faithful straw man, without once lifting his eyes, bent over the great book of records, reading with tense interest and lively apprehension of the progress of the Oztumer and the Airlanders towards the capital of Oz. End of Chapter 17.
Chapter 18 of Ozoplaning with the Wizard of Oz. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Beth Thomas. Ozoplaning with the Wizard of Oz by Ruth Plumly Thompson. Chapter 18. Strut of the Strat arrives in Oz. For several hours after leaving Stratovania, Nick followed the Wizard's map implicitly. With Strut leaning over the back of his seat, eyes glued to both map and board, there was nothing else he could do. If he deviated from the course by so much as a hair's breadth, the Airlander would tap him on his tin head with his staff. The Tin Woodman had not expected Strut to be so clever about navigating, and as time passed, he grew less and less hopeful of outwitting the wily airman. If he increased the speed of the Oztober in an effort to outdistance Strut's flying warriors, they also increased their speed. Try as he would, it seemed quite impossible to lose them. But Nick Chopper did not despair. He was counting on the night to help him. Never tiring or needing sleep, he would have the advantage of Strut then. As soon as the Airlander relaxed in his seat, the Tin Woodman meant to fall upon him, hurl him from a window, put all the plane's lights out, and speed off in the dark, so swiftly the Stratovanians would be unable to follow. That failing, he depended on the difference in altitude to subdue the enemy. Perhaps when they reached the lower areas, Strut and his airmen would faint, wilt, and become harmless. So, bolstering his spirits with these heartening hopes, Nick bore as patiently as he could the long afternoon and the unpleasant taunts and company of his captor. Repassing the ice crescent without meeting any spikers, the Tin Woodman zoomed along, not even bothering to answer Strut's many questions about Oz and its inhabitants. Night, when it did come, was especially dark and murky. No moon and only a few stars dotted the arching skyway. The darker the better, rejoiced the Tin Woodman, taking quick little glances over his shoulder to see whether Strut was falling asleep or showing any signs of drowsiness. If it were just dark enough, he'd rid himself of these flying pests in a hurry. But all his plans proved futile. As the Oztober rushed on, and the hours dragged slowly by, Strut grew ever more alert and watchful. His star-shaped eyes twinkled and glowed with sulphurous lights, and he showed no more signs of weariness than the Tin Woodman himself. The endurance of the Airlander and his warriors was positively uncanny, and Nick, manoeuvring the buttons and the wheel of the plane, grew increasingly discouraged and gloomy. Flying at this rate, they would arrive at the Emerald City early in the morning, and to think that he was leading this band of savages upon the defenceless city almost broke Nick Chopper's heart. As it was a red plush heart, it could not really break, but it fluttered up and down in his tin bosom like a bird beating against the bars of a cage. To Nick's suggestion that he rest, Strut gave a contemptuous snort. "I'll rest in Ozma's palace," he sneered maliciously. "Do you think I trust you enough to sleep? Oh, no. Just attend to your flying, Mr. Funneltop, and I'll take care of the rest of this little adventure." After this, Nick made no further remarks, and morning found the Oztober sailing high above the Hammerhead Mountains in the Quadling country of Oz. All too soon, the Tin Woodman made out the glittering green turrets and spires of the Emerald City itself. "Quite a pretty little town," observed Strut condescendingly, as Nick, his thoughts in a perfect tumult, tried to think of some excuse for not landing. "Why are you not flying over the castle?" demanded Strut sharply. "It's the castle I'm most anxious to reach. There, you can come right down inside the walls. My, so this is the wonderful land of Oz. Well, it owes me its crown jewels and treasure to pay for your insolent invasion of the Strat. Collecting them should prove pleasant, very pleasant indeed." "I wouldn't be too sure of that," snapped Nick, turning his head stiffly. "I suppose you realize you're in great danger. If Ozma sees you before you have time to storm the castle, you and your silly flock of flyers are likely to be turned to crows or sparrows. The chances are she has seen you," concluded Nick, slanting the Oztober sharply downward. At Nick's warning, the few clouds flitting across the airman's forehead became positively thunderous. "Poof!" he sniffed, snapping his fingers scornfully. "Do you suppose a mere girl like this Ozma of Oz can frighten me? My blowmen will soon attend to her and anyone else who stands in our way." "That," shouted Nick, raising his voice above the roar of the engine, "remains to be seen." As a matter of fact, the Oztober and the swarm of flying warriors had been sighted almost as soon as they appeared above the green lands edging the capital. Long before they reached the Emerald City itself, terrified messengers had brought word of the approaching airmen. Ozma being absent, Betsy and Trot, the two little mortal girls who lived with Dorothy and the Supreme Ruler in the Emerald Palace, were in charge. After one glance at the flying army, they had called all the celebrities, servants, and courtiers together and bade them flee for their lives. Then Betsy, Trot, and the Patchwork Girl climbed into the red wagon. With the Sawhorse to pull them, they set off at a gallop to hide in the blue forests of the Munchkin country till the invasion was over. Tik-Tok, the Machine Man, carrying all of Ozma's loose jewels and valuables, marched rapidly after them. The Medicine Man rode the Hungry Tiger, and the rest of the palace inmates ran helter-skelter down the yellow brick highway from the capital. The inhabitants of the Emerald City itself, never having seen the Wizard's Ozoplanes and having no way of knowing that Nick Chopper was inside this one, were almost as afraid of the Oztober as of the Stratovanians. Pelting into their houses and shops, they bolted windows and doors and waited in terror-stricken silence for whatever was to come. Only the guardian of the gate stayed bravely at his post, waving his bunch of keys defiantly as the Ozoplane and the Airlanders swooped over the castle wall. "Ho! No, you don't!" cried Strut, as Nick, having brought the plane to a landing, started to run for the door. "You'll stay with me as a hostage," he rasped, gripping the Tin Woodman's arm. Furious but helpless in the iron grip of the Stratovanian, Nick was forced to lead him into Ozma's beautiful castle. Strut's warriors, after fluttering like curious birds from tree to tree and alighting in chattering groups on the wall, finally furled the wings of their staffs, formed ranks, and marched singing and shouting up the steps after their jubilant leader. In vain Nick watched for any signs of weakening among them. The airmen seemed as comfortable and carefree in this lower altitude as they had been on their own aerosphere. The Tin Woodman's only consolation was that he had brought back the wizard's Ozoplane in as good condition as when it had started away so unexpectedly. It was also a great relief to him to find the castle deserted. Not a courtier, servant, or celebrity was in sight. Not even the glass cat or Dorothy's little kitten, Eureka. Strut and his rude army stamped through the first floor from end to end without encountering a single soul. "Very good," sniffed the ruler of all the Stratovanians, shooting his eyes sharply to left and right. "So this powerful fairy, Ozma of Oz, has run off and left us her castle, and we win the war without blowing a blow. Ho, ho! I shall spend my summers in this enchanting palace," he added, with a malicious wink at the Tin Woodman. "But now," his grasp on Nick's arm tightened, "where are these famous magic treasures and jewels you were boasting of? This belt and fan and all the other foolishness and fripperies?" "In a safe in Ozma's own apartment," Nick told him reluctantly. Now that Strut was in complete possession of the castle, little was to be gained by concealing the location of the treasures. "Take me there at once," he commanded Nick, and, because the 1,000 Airlanders were a bit too numerous for comfort, Strut ordered them out into the garden, bidding them man the walls, guard the gates and all the entrances, and give the alarm should any of the Ozlanders approach. Then, with lowered head and dragging feet, the Tin Woodman led the way to Ozma's private sitting room. The safe, sparkling with emeralds embedded in metal more valuable than platinum, stood in an alcove behind a pair of silk curtains. Giving little heed to the elegant appointments of the apartment itself, Strut knelt before the safe, fairly panting with impatience and curiosity. "How does it open?" he asked, spinning the little knob on the door round and round, without any results whatsoever. "I'm sure I cannot say." Resting one elbow on the golden mantle, the Tin Woodman looked indifferently at the kneeling airman. "Only Ozma and our wizard ever open that safe." "Oh, is that so?" Strut straightened up angrily. "We shall see about that. All I have to do is call one of my blowmen and blow it open." "Suit yourself," said Nick with a shrug of his shoulders. "Only if you do, the safe probably will blow away, and all the treasures with it." "Then how in the dicks shall I open it?" screamed Strut, giving it a spiteful kick with his silver-shod toe. Worn out by his long vigil of the night and the excitement of taking possession of the castle, he lost his temper completely, and stamped and raged up and down before Ozma's jewelled strongbox. But thump and bang at the door as he would, it still remained shut. "Ha!" he puffed at last. "I'll call my swordsmith. He can hammer it open." Racing over to the window, he yelled loudly for the swordsmith to come up. But Strut's swordsmith had no more success than his master. Kindling a fire in the grate, he heated a poker red-hot and tried to burn a hole in the door, but the poker did not leave even a scratch on the glittering surface. "Stop, stop, you witless waff! I'll do it myself," raged Strut. "I'll blow it open with star powder." "Surely you wouldn't do that," protested Nick, who up to this time had been watching the effort of the two airmen with quiet amusement. "If you blow up the safe, you might set fire to the castle and destroy all the treasures you have won." "Oh, hold your tongue," advised Strut. Dragging 2 smouldering logs from the grate, he shoved them under the safe. Then, unscrewing the end of his flying stick, he sprinkled a fine black powder that smelled and looked like gunpowder over the logs. Lighting a twisted paper, he stuck it beneath the logs and jumped back, waiting impatiently for the safe to fly apart. Nick Chopper waited not a moment longer. Darting into the dressing room, he hastily filled a pitcher with water. But before he could return, an ear-splitting explosion rocked the castle and flung him and the pitcher through the doorway of the sitting room. Without stopping to recover his breath, the Tin Woodman jumped up and hurried across the room. The two airmen with blackened clothes and faces stared dazedly at the spot where the safe had been. Where it had been, because it was no longer there. Not a sign, emerald, or single splinter of it. There was no hole in the ceiling, so it could not have blown up. There was no hole in the floor, so it could not have blown down. The windows were unbroken, and the walls intact. Only the 2 logs, smoking sullenly on Ozma's priceless rug, remained of the Airlanders' bonfire. unless we count the expression on Strut's face, which simply blazed with wrath, bafflement, and unadulterated fury. End of chapter 18.